Way to go, Alex.
Okay, so it's on. That's right.
Maybe call to order. As per WTO procedure, this will be a brief closing session.
Bring it down.
I believe that the press will receive some instruction after this session. Let me begin by offering my very sincere thanks and my very highest regard for Director General Moore, to our working group chairs and co-chairs, to the WTO Secretariat and the Deputies Director General, and to each of the delegations representing their governments here at this ministerial for their very hard and very productive work over the past week. I would also like to thank the City of Seattle, the State of Washington, and our hosts in the Seattle community for their hospitality and their patience during a sometimes very difficult week. Over the past 4 days, we have engaged in intense discussions and negotiations on one of the core questions facing the world today: the creation of a global trading economy for the next century. The delegates have taken up some of the most profound and important issues and policy decisions imaginable, including issues that previous rounds could not resolve and matters that have not come up before in the trading system. They took up these issues with goodwill and mutual respect and made progress on many of them. But the issues that have been before us are diverse, highly complex, and often novel. And together with this, we found that the WTO has outgrown the processes appropriate to an earlier time. Just as issues of transparency may affect outside perceptions of the WTO, issues of transparency also impact internal perceptions of the WTO by the member economies themselves. An increasing and necessary view, generally shared among the members, was that we needed a process which had a greater degree of internal transparency and inclusion to accommodate a rather huge and very diverse membership. We embarked on such a process, the first ever in the GATT system or the WTO, to attempt to ensure broad inclusion of all of the members. But this process became exceptionally difficult to manage, stretching both the substantive and the procedural capability of the ministerial. And we found, in addition, that as time passed, divergences of opinion that have long dogged the issues under discussion remain. And while very substantial progress was made in many areas, issues that remained were highly complicated and, we believed, could not be overcome rapidly. My judgment, and this was initially my judgment, and in turn, the judgment shared by the Director General, the working group chairs and co-chairs, and the membership generally, was that it would be best to take a time out, consult with one another, and find a creative means to finish the job. Therefore, ministers have agreed to suspend the work of the ministerial. During this time, we want the Director General to consult with delegations in order to do two things. First and foremost, to ensure that the WTO, as an internal matter, develops the kinds of rules and processes which ensure the maximum transparency for all delegations. And second, we want the Director General to consult with delegations and discuss creative ways in which we can bridge the remaining differences in areas where consensus does not yet exist, and that will allow the ministerial to resume and complete its work. I would note that under the Uruguay Round agreements, mandated negotiations in agriculture and services must proceed beginning January 2000. This, in fact, will proceed as per the Uruguay Round agreement, and so negotiations on agriculture and on services will commence in January under already established WTO rules for such negotiations, and those will be held in Geneva. Let me again thank Director General Moore, the Seattle community, and all of our delegations for their very hard work and their active and sincere participation in these talks. Our work together has been a great honor and privilege for me personally, and I look forward to its continuation in the weeks and months ahead.
To our chairperson, Charlene, for her work and dedication over the last few days. And I want to pay tribute to the ministers, ambassadors, and the loyal and dedicated staff of the WTO. We've never had so many ministers at a WTO meeting. They came from all over the world, from the small island countries to the great democracies. Those ministers probably represented over 1 billion voters. And they came to a conference to try and put together a package that would advance living standards in their own country and provide more justice elsewhere. This was a remarkable meeting. Much was done. That work will not be lost. We will not lose the work that we began the small island countries, the vulnerable atolls. We will not lose the hard work we did and yet to finish for the least developed countries. And we will never turn our backs on those members of this organisation who work so hard, to those ministers and to their governments and to their parliaments that they return to. I want to say thank you. You are the elected representatives of your people, and there is no greater honour than to serve your country this way. Charlene said it right. It's time out. And this is not the first time this sort of thing's happened. Several times, GATT meetings in the old days couldn't quite make it. The issues were so complex. And heavens, we're as complex as the world itself, and getting more complex. And we do, as Charlene says, have a deep institutional problem. Here we are, servicing the governments that drive us. We are owned by the governments. Any deal we do has to be ratified and agreed by parliaments and congresses. And it's hard work. And that's why I admire the ministers and their ambassadors so much. We had our first in Seattle, an assembly of legislators from dozens of parliaments, all interested in what's happening, because in the end their votes in the Congress and the Parliament decides upon the fortunes of this institution. So we're taking time out, because that was the judgment of the team. It's happened many times before. We don't lose the work. We've got an inbuilt agenda, and we've got a mandate to continue doing some of this work. And I look forward to servicing my colleagues and friends that way. So to the people of Seattle and others who have been so friendly over the last few days, I want to say thank you. It has been a great pleasure and honour to meet with many of you. There's hundreds of volunteers who have been helping the organisation, the host committee, working hard. They're the true heroes. And this city, what a magnificent place. You have everything. You have nature, you have creative business people, you have a talented workforce. Oh, if only the world could be like Seattle. Of course it's not. They just want to be like Seattle. That's why the members of the WTO.
With great thanks and personal appreciation all around, we now adjourn this plenary session. Thank you so much.
Ça, c'est les...
On a un moratoire.
On a un moratoire de fait.
Moratoire qui est Seattle, cette Belgique.
Alors.
Get your attention, please. There'll be a delay for this press briefing, I'm afraid. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Let me begin by apologizing for my scheduling screw up here. It was a doozy. If I could go back to the question that was put forward by Richard Quest of BBC. Richard, where are you?
We have to start from the beginning. Start from the beginning, please.
Richard, can you start from the beginning?
Ambassador Bashevsky. Okay. First of all, did you speak to the White House or the President before taking the decision to bring these talks to time out, as you put it? And Director General, was this the first trade talks where the developing world felt that their voice was properly heard and actually their views were properly taken account of, as many have told us following the meeting?
With respect to your first question, yes, of course. We consulted with the White House and with the President all during the day, as I had said, in the smaller room. I had been thinking about this issue for a number of hours before talking more about taking it further. And so, of course, yes, the White House and the President were fully involved.
I think the question to me was, some developing countries have said this was the first time they felt their concerns would be paid attention to. Well, it's very flat, and I don't think we've paid enough attention. We've got to learn how to do it better. We've tried very hard in the new system we've evolved to involve as many as we can, but it's not good enough. We're running an institution of over 130 members based on a culture 50 years old of 30 or so members, and that has been one of our difficulties. Not only here, but in Geneva. Some of you, it may come as a surprise that 30 of our member nations do not have enough resources to have a mission in Geneva. So we've organised weeks and information try to engage. It's never enough. It is enormously disappointing that we were not able to finally put together a package for the least developed countries, because they need jobs and opportunity, and we weren't able to put together the package we want for technical assistance for the marginalised. But I can report to you that all that work and implementation elsewhere is not lost. We can start again. This is not the first time around as we postponed. It's almost a regular event. It is an extremely complex situation, and I'm looking forward to fulfilling the mandate given to me by the ministers today.
Yes, Larry Elliott, please.
Larry Elliott of The Guardian. Mr. Moore, you came here promising a development round for developing countries. You've ended in abject failure. Are you considering your own position as Director General of the WTO in the light of that?
I don't think I ever was foolish enough to name the round. There were various names used. I want to do a lot more in regards to developing countries. I've spent my life in public service, and I like to think that my life in public service has been based on looking after those in battle and the strugglers and those who have the least. That's my life. I see WTO as doing more. Now, I intend to fulfil my contract. I've got a background in fulfilling contracts in the labour movement.
I'd like to make a comment also, if I may. A round is for all countries, of course, least developed, developing, and developed. But we did make actually quite a bit of progress in each of the texts in differentiating, particularly the least developed, but also developing countries from those more developed. And I think that there was a very good spirit on the part of the developed countries and indeed some of the higher income developing countries to ensure that whether the subject was agriculture or tariffs or non-tariff barriers, capacity building and so on, that special provision was drafted to ensure more benefits for those countries or better access for those countries through a process of of negotiation. So I think that that was very positive. The Quad countries are continuing to work on an initiative for the poorest countries with respect to preferential market access and with respect to capacity building. And that Quad work, based on some joint work that the U.S. and the EU did, and now joined by Japan and Canada, will continue.
Yes, Fred Bartu, the gentleman there, and then Jeff Weinstock, please.
Fred Bartu, but I use it as I in Switzerland. I have to swallow my anger first before I can put the question without emotions, but I would like to ask Ms. Paszewski whether she's aware of the sort of unflattering comments that delegates and ministers have made. And I won't repeat them here, I don't need to put salt in your wounds. But basically, what do you say to these people who said this was a terrible mess, this was the worst organized conference? And maybe going even further, they say, some of them said this was deliberately done, and that failure has always been an option, a political option for the United States, who has been lukewarm, the best at the beginning, for this round. So, was failure a political option? Is that a price that you are prepared to pay in order to make sure that Al Gore gets his candidacy?
Apart from the outrageousness of the question, though not the commentary, which I'm interested to hear. No, the United States came to this conference, decided to chair and host the conference. The President of the United States attended the conference, all with the intention that a new round should be launched. There has never been any question about that, nor has there ever been any wavering of any sort in the U.S. intention to participate in the launch of a new global round. There is no question about that at all. The United States came with, I think, a very flexible attitude. I think the United States demonstrated its flexibility a number of times. I also think that the issues that had been intractable, particularly agriculture, as well as other issues, for so many years, still, in terms of the very most difficult decisions, remain intractable. That is simply a factual statement, not a statement of the intention of the United States. So our goal has been, and will continue to be, the launch of a new global round, and there has never been any question or wavering or second thoughts or any action inconsistent with that single objective.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Madam Ambassador, how much of the collapse or the suspension has to do not with the process and the organization, but rather with the substantial disagreement of third world countries, NGOs, etc.?
I don't think any, because most of those issues were not even gotten to in the course of the deliberations that we have had today. There were a number of texts that were developed in the plenary session of the ministers. There was a text, for example, developed on the questions of trade and globalization, development, and labor, still needing to be obviously discussed and so on, but it had not been discussed. What I think happened, and this has happened, this is the fourth in the series of this kind of episode, is that delegations came, I think, prepared to work exceptionally hard and very much in good faith, but not quite willing to make the political decisions. And that is actually what happened.
Jeff Weinstock, please. Mic in front for Jeff.
Yes, Jeff Weinstock, Wall Street Journal, Europe. The NGOs are saying that the suspension of talks is a victory for them and the protesters here this week. Do you agree with that?
No, the suspension of talks had to do with the substance of what was being discussed. There really was not a discussion in the sort of the more restricted meetings of the issues relevant to the NGOs, because some of the baseline issues were simply not resolved in an adequate fashion, or simply not resolved at all. Obviously, the protesters expressed a series of views, which, as you know, are views in many instances with which the United States is sympathetic. But this really did not play a role in the deliberations today.
Guy de Jonquière, please.
Thank you. I would like to follow up on that question. Given that perceptions play a very important role in this business, and given the state of shell shock into which most OECD member governments were thrust after the NGOs claimed, rightly or wrongly, responsibility for the ending the MAI, could you please tell us how you think that in the next efforts to get around going again, the role of the NGOs should be taken into account, and precisely how you wish to change your tactics, since clearly the situation where they are left claiming victory for what is obviously the failure of governments is not one that responsible policymakers can tolerate.
First, let me confirm, I think the failure is the failure of governments. It is not related to the NGOs. But you know, the United States has now for several years urged increased transparency in the WTO process, including greater public participation. For example, with respect to our initiatives on opening up the dispute settlement process to public observation. These are and have been difficult issues for the WTO because the institution, as we get before it, is government to government. And so on the part of many countries, there's great reluctance to further open the process, even in cases of dispute settlement, which are almost quasi-judicial proceedings in nature. I think this is an area whose time will come, I would hope sooner rather than later, because just as there are always concerns within the WTO about the transparency afforded all countries, there are public concerns similarly about the transparency afforded, and both need to be addressed.
Jutta Henning, please, and the gentleman here, and then we'll have 2 more questions after that.
Ambassador Wojciechowski, I had a few quick follow-ups on your comments. First, do you see the DSU review on hold as a result of the events this week, or is that something that can be moved forward on its own? Second, you said the work on behalf of the LLDCs will continue. When can we expect a U.S. announcement on the initiative that the President has politically endorsed? And third, you said you believed that some of the countries coming here in good faith were not ready to make the hard political decisions. What do you see happening next year that would change that and would allow them to make the hard political decisions?
I think on your questions about the dispute settlement understanding, I think the WTO will do sort of a general inventory of matters. I think that will continue, and I think that the DSU review will be completed. With respect to the least developed country initiative, We have had a series of discussions with Europe, but also Japan and Canada. And I can't tell you when those discussions will conclude, except that they're moving along, I think, at a very good pace. And with respect to political decision-making, there was a Brussels Ministerial in 1990, which was when the Uruguay round originally was going to close. People came, and they simply weren't ready, and ultimately things were somewhat delayed. But there was a similarly failed result in December of 1992, and then the round concluded in 1993. I think sometimes an iteration helps move the process along. I think that will be the case here.
Yes, please, sir, in front.
Thank you. I'm Thomas Vermes with the Nation of Norway. Ambassador Warszawski, I would like to ask you, was the leadership of this conference in accordance with your ambitions as to democracy in the organization? Thank you.
Yes, in the sense that we employed, first off, as the principal vehicle, a working group process in which all countries could participate at their own choosing. That was the first time that had ever happened, and that is the process by which the initial negotiating texts were developed. The chairs of that process worked very, very hard to bring those texts along, but ultimately, again, because there are a huge array of issues which in the past have proven intractable, remain so. And so we convened a green room process, which I would consider the old style of doing business, where you put, a very, very limited number of countries in a rather small room. And as I said, my observation in that process, which I chaired, where I pushed delegations in various ways, demonstrated to me fairly concretely that governments were not ready to take the lead. I mean, it's that simple. If that's the case, and it was, we could stay there all night, we could stay there for 5 days, it wouldn't matter. Governments weren't ready to take the lead. And in a situation like that, I felt very strongly that we ought to, as I said, take the time out, because sometimes you need to stop before you can actually make progress. This is not uncommon in negotiations. And I think we will make progress, and I think the time out was absolutely necessary.
Pete, please. Pete Casper.
Ambassador Warszawski, the agriculture and services negotiations you said will continue, but so much of the progress made in those areas depended on balanced progress in other areas. So now that these issues will be on their own for at least a while, can we expect any progress on them?
I think there will be progress on each because of the progress made here. That is, countries now know each other's positions in these two areas to a rather large extent. Not necessarily captured in writing, but certainly understood in discussions. That in and of itself, I think, will generate progress. And then, of course, Mike Moore will be working simultaneously on the array of issues which have been left on the table today. And that process will also move along simultaneously. And I think there'll be something with a synergistic effect between the two.
Before I get the final question to the man in the back over there to my right, The EU Commission has asked me to inform you that there will be briefing in this room immediately after this briefing that we're giving right now. Yes, please, sir. Thank you for your patience.
It's Steve Myrtle from the Canadian Press. I just want to follow up on the last point. If you believe that there will be progress on the agriculture front, what's the foundation of that belief when you have essentially the political decision makers here, presumably, when you take it back to Geneva where the diplomats will take over? On what basis, considering they seem to come together on core principles, on what basis will that progress be made? And secondly, from the standpoint of the United States, given that you're going into an election year now, what level of engagement would you expect, both from the administration and the American public, on the trade issue? And if there's a change in the White House to a Republican administration, I realize that's a hypothetical, but what impact will that have? Even if there is a Democrat, presumably the new president will have to have some time to get up to speed. So on those 2 points.
With respect to progress, no negotiation starts at the end of it. And there's huge amounts of work in agriculture negotiations that have to take place before you get to the very most difficult issues. And for that reason, I am absolutely confident progress will take place, because that is the nature of the kind of very complicated negotiation that always attends agricultural trade issues. With respect to the election year and all of that, the administration has been and will remain firmly engaged. First off, because we want to launch a new round. Second off, we have China MFN on our plate. If that doesn't show engagement, I can't imagine what would. And third, we have a variety of other initiatives which will be moving along and pushing to conclusion. So yes, the United States will remain absolutely, firmly, actively, and indeed enthusiastically engaged in trade throughout the year.
Thank you very much.